So as I mentioned, I'm Elaine. I'm one of the founders, along with Jim Callback, my business partner. We run the Jobs to Be Done Toolkit, which is really just a resource of videos and learning materials for applying jobs to be done at your organization. You can always find us on Twitter. Our URL is jtbdtoolkit.com. You can email us. We're totally available if you have any questions or you're interested in any sort of resources. We can help connect you with those. All right, Jim. Next section. Great. So what do we have in the agenda for today? I'm going to go through a couple of toolkit updates. We have our amazing special guest, Steph Troth. She is here with us to talk about her experience at using Jobs to Be Done as head of research at DXR, which is a public policy agency, I believe, but we can get more details on that in just a moment. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a Q&A where you can talk to Steph and Jim about your experiences using Jobs to Be Done and any questions that you might have. So really quickly with the toolkit updates. So we have our very popular upcoming job maps course starting in about a week. However, it is almost sold out. We literally have one seat left. So if anybody here is interested in joining, registration closes tomorrow. You can send me an email if you don't think you'll be able to get your registration in on time, but I did want to leave it open just for this group in case somebody was sort of on the fence and they want to join. We have about one seat left. If you aren't able to do that, we also have our Jtbd Toolkit Essentials course, which is a great go at your own pace learning research. And we recently introduced community watch parties. Our next one is tomorrow at 12 p.m. So if you have purchased the Essentials course and you're interested in watching the videos in more of a community type environment, you're more than welcome to join us on Zoom. We'll have the chat open, we'll stream the videos. It'll last about an hour. Pretty straightforward, very easy. And again, that's for the Essentials course customers. And then Jim, if you could scroll down just a little bit further, great. The next Untangled is Tuesday, April 26th. So I'll post a link in the chat in just a few minutes. You can register there. Keep an eye on our Twitter if you want to sign up later on. And those are all the updates. Jim, do you want to take over?
Yep, sure. So this is a community call, and we use the Zoom, the regular Zoom as opposed to the webinar so that you can turn your webcams on. So if you haven't done that already, turn your webcams on, but please head over to the chat and you can chat with each other. But we like to leave a lot of time for questions and discussions. So as we're talking, or even just right now, before we even start talking, put your questions in Zoom and Elaine's going to help us pull those out. And then after I talk to Steph, we're gonna dig into your questions and we'll have you come on and talk directly to Steph and to myself and to Elaine. So yeah, let's make this interactive and as engaging as possible. And with that, I'm gonna introduce Steph. So I'm here in London at a conference. Yeah, hey Steph, thanks for joining. And my connection to you actually has to do with London because I think the first time we met, we were speaking at UX London along with Sean Townsend, and the three of us were talking on Jobs to Be Done. And the organizer said, "Hey, maybe you guys should meet first of all, but also kind of sync up so that your talks kind of I don't know, don't conflict. I don't know why we did that, but we met and it was very lovely. And I still stay in touch with Sean. In fact, I did a workshop for her team, and I'm not sure if you're in touch with Sean, Steph, but yeah. So even before the book came out and all this kind of stuff, Steph was an inspiration for me and helped me with my thinking, and she also contributed a case study for the book. So we had other folks on who contributed case studies for the book as well too. So with that connection in the background and your work in Jobs to Be Done, we want to welcome you to Jobs to Be Done Untangled, Steph.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me, Jim.
Yeah. So tell us.
It's funny that you're in London. You're not that far away.
Oh, well, I'm not that far away. Yeah, I know. Where are you exactly?
I'm about, an hour outside of the southeast edge of London, if you like. Okay. So it's not that far, but far enough to have maybe better air than London, I have to say.
Nice. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your background? I know Elaine already hinted that, you're kind of on the research side of things, but tell us about your current job and maybe even, before that, and what type of roles you've had.
Yeah, probably best to start from the beginning, maybe, and I'll go back, work forwards. I usually work backwards. So I actually started way back when I was a developer. I come from the tech background, I have a computer science background, but over time I just realized that I kind of like people problems better than tech problems. It was just far more interesting. And also, yeah, so it took me quite a few years to sort of like end up focusing on sort of user experience. So I did go through the phase of being interaction designer, information architect, way back when those are terms we were using. And then when I sort of like switched properly over from tech to user experience, I was working at strategic level on a tech part already. So I was doing a user experience strategy even before there was such a term. But that said, I would recognize that if I wanted to be a good strategist, I really need to get a handle on the research. That's where I knew how to conduct usability tests by then. I was doing that as a developer, but I really want to get better at it and sort of know. And because I think it was Aaron Walter who said it to me once, like if you don't have evidence, your strategy is just guesswork. So, and fast forward in time, I've taken on, so I did some work with MailChimp way back when I led their design research in Europe. Although it's kind of funny because it was only mostly me, and then I sort of coordinated with my colleagues at Atlanta. And then various roles leading design research, and now I'm a head of research at Jtbd, and we are a UK-based employer and agency. And like Luna was saying, we work primarily with the public sector here. So think government departments, the UK Youth Civil Service, charities and cultural institutions and the like. So that's hopefully a really quick whistle stop.
No, that's great.
Introduction.
Yeah. I love the idea of, you can't have strategy without human insights, right? And that have, research is strategic. I always approached research that way. And I think that was one reason why I was attracted to Jobs to be Done. I had a little bit more of a product design role, but I always did research ethnography and things like that, contextual inquiry. And when I learned about Jobs to be Done, there was a ton of bricks that hit me because of the strategic application of it, right? I think it really helped inform strategy. And of course, I read all kinds of different perspectives and all different approaches, but I know that you're particularly handy with switch interviews, right? And I think that's a method that you kind of lead with. Can you tell us about your work with switch interviews and how you go about those?
Ooh, maybe like a little bit of background to that. Maybe I ended up going through with the switch interviews mostly because my colleague at MailChimp at the time, Greg, was ended up in, I'm not entirely sure how, he never told me the story, ended up in Bob Moester and Chris Speaks workshop somewhere. I do not remember where. We're talking about like before 2013, so memory is a bit hazy now. It just so happened that they ran a workshop in Cambridge, and Greg says, you should go. And so that was how I probably approached Jtbd, from the switch side rather than more the outcome-driven innovation side of things, mostly just because that was my first introduction to it. And what attracted me to the switch method was the psychology of how that interview works. And I think actually it's in your book, Jim, that you talked about the origins of the switch interview. I guess what at the time, sort of like parallel there, I was actually looking at story structures, mostly part of like fiction writing, which is something else I do, but thinking about how to use story techniques. And one of the things that struck me about the switch interview is that it's a story-based interview technique. And it's just that it's a very specific story. So it's the story of how somebody makes a decision to commit to something. And, the original language we use was like buying, purchasing. But over time, when I started having to adopt the method to, say, working in the public sector, working at where people are doing studies with it doesn't not necessarily involve monetary exchange or transactional, if you like. So I started thinking about it as commitment rather than purchasing.
Yeah, I really like that, because I think as soon as you say purchase, you say, oh, there's a solution involved, and okay, it's product research, it's not Jobs to be Done research. But I know if you read like Bob Moester's stuff, he talks about energy, And I see, correct me if I'm wrong, Steph, but I see switch interviewing as kind of a reverse engineering of the energy that led to the commitment. And if you can reverse engineer that, you get to the job, right? So there's a commitment,
Yes.
and there's energy, and you're trying to reverse engineer that working backwards, right? And that's so just for folks who maybe don't know or aren't familiar firsthand with the switch interview, just describe to us how that works, particularly your flavor of it and how you approach switch interviewing.
Goodness. I don't know if that's a specific, like, I feel like I adapt it every time I use it.
I do the same thing, by the way. I never run the same method. Every project, every persona, everything I've ever done, it's always been adapted. So I'm with you on that one. So don't apologize is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm being British. Oh, there you go. I'm being very British. Yes, we apologize for being apologetic. Let's see. If there is a sort of a way to explain it, what you're looking for is you are looking. So, if you do sort of like just a web search and just look at the sort of switch interview, and you see there's usually a timeline associated with that. And the idea of this timeline starts from the first thought that somebody has to either commit to a new thing, purchase a new thing, and sort of the other end is when they have purchased or commit something. And what you're trying to look at is all the moments in between where it sways them towards making the decision, or what stopped them from moving forward with making that decision. And those are the details and the dynamics you're trying to get. Way back when I first learned from Bob, and they started doing the interviews at the first thought. So what made you think about buying this coffee mug? This is not a coffee mug, it's got tea in it, and it's got a cat that says Duke. So what made you think about buying a cat mug? And and then on the other end, however, over time I realized it's a lot easier it's definitely much more, you get better insights, let's put it that way, if you actually start from the moment of commitment, because that's what people remember first and foremost, and I just work backwards. I guess if that's a generalization of how I would conduct a typical switch interview, maybe. Don't know if you.
Yep, no, that's good. So the question, and I've only done myself, like on my own projects, just a little bit of switch type interviewing. And I know people combine methods. So I've talked to people who say they do switch and then they go forward and do like an ODI type thing. What do you do with the data that you get? So you're doing these interviews and they're qualitative, right? What's your next step? What are you doing? And then, kind of what are the outcomes after that step?
To be honest, it was sometimes I use the job language around it. So sort of once or twice I would actually build up to a core job if I need to speak to a stakeholder for where that sort of statement is very punchy and very relatable, very human. So it makes them relate to, say, probably the biggest switch interview I've done is probably I want to say at least 20 people. It was a huge qualitative round. So when you have that volume of data you do have the challenge of going through sort of qualitative analysis. But so there are very few times when I end up using the job language, because most of the time the rest of the insight is good enough, like just the behavior, the points where people hesitate, the points where they the points where the decision making sort of takes a turn. Those are the points that are more useful, say, because most of the time I use switch for value proposition testing. And I say testing in a way where it's like, if a proposition already exists, I would use the method to see if it validates. And if a proposition for a product doesn't quite exist, I use the method to just basically help define the proposition. And the end of it is less of a job statement, but more of a proposition, sort of like a discussion of what the proposition is. So that makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Have you ever used the value proposition canvas? That's actually one of the plays in my playbook, because it actually starts with jobs to be done. So I could imagine doing switch interviews, and what you get out of that, you put it into the value proposition canvas, and then you do the pains and the gains, and that's how you would generate your statement from that. Have you ever used Alexander Osterwalder's framework?
It's funny because I have taught it, I have looked at it, but in the end, I think the result's the same, even if I don't use it exactly. So we still look at the pains and gains. We still look at, all sort of those tipping points. But I think the interesting thing for me is that the switch interview gets you so much richness in such a short time. It's a very effective interview. I want to tell you sort of like, because I don't like to always talk about a method. Being a researcher, I don't like to talk about it without talking about the shortfalls. So allow me. The interesting challenge I have sort of like philosophically about the switch interview is you are relying on the fact that your participant is post-rationalizing an experience. And from an evidence gathering perspective, I'm thinking like, how true is this? Are we mostly getting attitudinal data rather than behavioral data? And I'm assuming that people on this call understand the difference, being attitudes being what people say and behavior being what they do. So essentially what's unique about the switch interview is people saying what they thought they did. So it's a combination of, so I call it post-rationalization because it's what it is. And over time, I've sort of made peace with it. It's just something that I think you want to be aware of, and in the way you ask questions during a switch interview. So I almost don't use any of the textbook questions now so Bob might have had in their original interviews that you can still see online. Mostly because just having this understanding that what you really want to get to is the distinction between someone thinking something and someone actual behavior, because they're only telling you it and you don't see it. So like I said, over time I make peace with it, mostly because then I feel like it's like when you have somebody on a couch in a sort of a therapy session, they're going to tell you the narrative that they have formed in their head. And I'd like to think that because they are going to come to your product with some kind of internal narrative is okay. So that's how I make peace with that. That's shortfall number one. I don't know if you want to talk more about that before I talk about the other shortfall that I know, the switch.
What's the other shortfall?
Maybe two. The other thing that Bob has already said is that, you kind of just struggle. The switch doesn't work very well without a struggle, without some hesitation. So like if somebody had got a giant paycheck and went and bought something really expensive without thinking about it, that's not necessarily, it doesn't make a good switch interview because there's no struggle. They're just going to say, I did that. So you're not going to get insights of why and what the jobs are. Well, good for them if they can, get the handle on something that they really want. But it's a different story. From a research perspective, it's difficult to get the insight than compared to, say, somebody who struggled to acquire that thing. So choice is another problem too. Like if there's no choice, the switch, you might struggle with getting insights from a switch interview. So that I'm sort of lumping that into sort of the second shortfall. The third one is something that I realized very recently, mostly because I'm on the side. I think I mentioned that I write fiction. And the concept of an individual narrative agent, like someone with agency to make a personal choice, is actually a very Anglo-Western construct, I want to say it that way. So if you happen to be out interviewing in a community level where your participants or your audience background is more diverse, I think the switch might be a challenge to apply if, for example, the decisions that they're having to make is a collective decision based on a community rather than an individual one. So you would have to adapt the interview quite differently in order to handle cases like those.
Right. And I've also found, correct me if I'm wrong, though, also in more B2B situations where there's actually a chain of decisions and attitudes and behaviors before you might get to, what you ultimately might call an end user as well, too. Have you ever used switch in that environment? So there might be a commitment there, but that commitment was thrust upon them, let's say, right? Or a group decision was made. How does switch stand up in those situations?
I think I would apply the same logic to if you were doing just an open, I want to say a normal non-Jtbd interview, just making sure that you speak to the end user as well as the decision maker, and make that two different job actors, if you like, because it so depends on the organizations, because like some organizations are they do have the feedback loop between the end user and the purchaser. Right. So you almost need to understand that circle of process, like how is the decision made between these two parties? And then, you know, but to be honest, like one of the things I tend to do in these cases, I tend to have one-on-one interviews. One of the things I have not done and might be fun to experiment is what happens if you put them together in a sort of like a double participant situation or a focus group situation.
Right.
I worry about that because, you know, because then your end user might have frustrations that
there could be a can of worms you open up, like political can of worms exactly. by doing that. Yeah.
Which is why I haven't done it, because every time I think about doing it, I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great because you know, I think for me, jobs to be done is a framework. It's a way of seeing. It's a language. There are, you know, techniques like job stories and things like that to help you formulate things. But for me, first and foremost, I think jobs to be done is a research, right? It's about observing human behavior that happens out in the wild, and it's messy. And there's tools and techniques to normalize that, right? And we put things into buckets and categorize things. And one of the big questions, and I think Elaine will verify this too, we get are around how do you do interviews? How do you talk to people? Because a lot of folks who are attracted to jobs to be done don't necessarily have the research sensibility that you do. So we actually had a course once. It was just research for jobs to be done, just focusing on that. Now we kind of skip over that pretty quickly in some of our materials, but there's a whole art and craft around that, and I think you know, for my taste, you're one of the best in terms of having kind of mastered the nuance of the art of the interview in different formats, because I know you don't just use switch interviews, right? There's other types of interviewing there as well too. Yeah, so thanks for coming on, and thanks for sharing your insights there. We wanted to get some questions, but is there anything you wanted to add before we go to the board, as they say?
Oh, there was something that you said that sort of like maybe will come back. Just the concept of research. It is true that it is, I mean, the roots of it is a research method, at least the switch anyway. I think ODI is a different beast. And both are valid. I mean, job mapping, for example, is probably one of the most flexible parts of the framework that I think that I would use, the things I use most of. Job mapping I see is the most flexible. The switch interview is very flexible because you can adapt it to different situations in product design, and the job language, I call it job language because for me that encompasses job stories, job statements, outcome-driven statements and stuff. And those are very helpful for different sort of processing of insights, synthesis. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Sorry. Maybe we should get to questions because
no. Go on.
Yeah, so I don't know, is it worth me showing that little sort of showing that chart thing?
I think since you brought it up, so I think folks on the call might like to see this landscape that you've contributed here. I need to stop. Let me stop. There you go. You should be able to do it now. Oh wow, I see all the webcams now. We got a lot of people here today, Elaine. That's nice. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, we have about 4 questions in queue, but I also think with Steph's diagram, if people want to come up and speak to it directly, I would encourage that as well.
Just to orient us to this, Steph.
Yeah. Well, similar to you, Jim, I've been sort of like going around like in the last few years, coaching Jtbd in different contexts, and one of the ways I find that because trying to understand it as a research toolbox, there's just so much to it. And so I did this little diagram way back where it was mostly for me to explain where the strengths and weaknesses are in jobs to be done. Because as a researcher, for me, it's just one interview technique. It's not, and hence I'm never afraid to talk about, when should you not use Jtbd? And so you can see where sort of on the left-hand side, the interviews and sort of like, what's your data gathering methods, what allows you to do analysis and what allows you to do synthesis modeling. And what's interesting about Jtbd, I guess, is that the job map, the statements and stuff, we talked about this, they're halfway between analysis and synthesis, like they allow you to do both in sort of like a iterative way. So when it comes to, and for me, it always is like, what what are you hiring JTBD for in what you're doing? Like
Right.
if you're like Venbridge from, I think, your last guest, right?
Yeah,
Or previous
Jan
one.
was
If you're like
on, yeah.
Venbridge, yeah, Jan, yeah, I really love the method and their approach. It's so if you're, but I don't do what they do. So what they do is
Right.
product design, and they're looking, at a landscape, whereas what I'm doing tends to be more digital, for one thing, and yeah, quite different, looking for quite different outcomes.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so this is just my way of mapping. Oops, I can't go backwards on here. I wonder why. So this is just one of my ways of mapping jobs to be done in terms of different research methods.
Yeah, that's great. And I talk about what I call jobs interviews, and it's kind of an open style interviewing, which is actually quite difficult. And what I've heard people do is actually using Switch, because it is such a tangible approach to the interview, to the data gathering, but then switch to job maps. So I've actually talked to somebody that said they do the front end with Switch interviews, and then they go up to that top track that you had there labeled ODI. And then they might have job stories in there as well too. Right. But to get started, Switch interviewing can be a great way to get started, particularly if you don't have experience doing just other types of interviewing. Thanks for that helpful picture. Yeah, I saw some folks say that they found that helpful, so I'm glad you shared that.
Okay, you're welcome. Got another one somewhere where I talk about how you fit it into the double diamond, but only if people are interested.
Let's see it. What do you think, Elaine? Yeah.
Let's do it.
Oh.
Yeah, that'd be a cliffhanger.
Okay.
If we didn't show it now, that would be a cliffhanger.
And just, if anybody,
I was trying to. Sorry, go, Elaine.
I was going to say, if anybody wants to jump on and ask any questions about what they're seeing, or share any thoughts that the images might generate, then please do.
So again, like, I like to draw little diagrams. I'm probably like not very researchy. So I was like, when do you use these things towards that? Because I usually work with service designers and designers, and thinking about the double diamond, where does this sit? And so so quite often, so it depends really on whether you are understanding the problem or trying to improve the solution.
Right.
So you want to start, if you're starting them at the beginning, they're hypotheses until you validate them. And then once you validate them, they can become North Stars, essentially, where you can aim towards for your sort of like your second diamond, your optimization, develop and deliver type cycle. So for me, the job mapping is great because you can see how it spans, 3 different phases, and I think it's very useful in these 3. I might be wrong. If anybody else has different opinions, I'm always up for changing this map. For me, these are work in progress. But like something like ODI, especially with the strategic stuff, it tends to be very much very early discovery type. Yeah. So that said, I remember, we had trouble nailing down sort of the interview techniques for ODI because, it's never been written down formally in many ways. Even though I think we've had this conversation where it's about a sense making of any data you can get in any form. And I think once you take an approach to that, I think that can work very well. Yeah. So I'm going to stop staring now.
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes I'll have the double diamond out too, and I often put job stories right at the pivot point in the middle, because for me, job stories are the pivot from the problem, and you might even have a little bit of solution depending on how you interpret the middle part of a job story. So I like the fact that you had those kind of right in the middle there as well too. That's how I think about job stories.
Nice. Yeah, so I bet we agree. Yeah,
super helpful. Yeah, well, we agree on a lot of things though, Steph. So
sorry everybody who was expecting any kind of fire and
no. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I should have guests on that are more contentious next time. I tend to invite my friends on, right, so that we all kind of agree here. But so we got some questions here, so I'm going to go to Hector. Hey Hector, do you want to come on and let us know your question? Is Hector here?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes, we can.
Oh, I'm putting my video.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, can you see me now?
Yeah. Hey Hector.
So thanks a lot, Steph. I'm having a lot of thoughts right now because of what you said. And well, I have, let me put you in context. We're trying to launch a CVC about jobs to be done. So I know jobs to be done. I have implemented jobs to be done, but my challenge right now is how to evangelize the jobs to be done, right? And not only to get clients, but to evangelize the idea that you need jobs to be done to do your job better, right? So my question is here, inside a company, who should be the first bought in the jobs to be done mindset? Should be the CEO, should be the product manager, should be the head of marketing or head of search. I don't know if you have those that in mind or something. And when you start or when you define that job performer, evangelize them, right?
Interesting. So I want to say I have come across, so one of the things I have done, I guess, is like train all manners of people from CEO to product manager to less head of marketing, actually. I've mostly ended up in product circles or designers or very occasionally the researcher, interestingly enough. The companies which do the strongest, forgive the pun, switch to Jtbd tends to come up from top. But I am never sure if they work very well. And I say that because I've had conversations with usually head of products who say, oh, CEO wants us to do Jtbd.
Yeah.
And the problem is it becomes too much top down, and people feel like they have to do it without, again, evaluating whether it's right for the problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah.
But then those are the ones who really try and adopt Jtbd quite seriously. I think the ones who have been most successful tends to when a product team adapts to it. I've had teams where researchers adapt it first. Because again, that tends to be the rarer case. Designers love it before the researchers do, in my experience, and I have no idea why. I keep asking people, and I have a feeling, I'm not sure why that is the case. Again, this is not strong evidence. All this is anecdotal in terms of my observations. So I feel like it tends to work better when it's adopted at a product level, from my experience, because it's more pragmatic. When it comes from a CEO, it becomes kind of a command. I don't know what you call it, like a
Sure.
You get more pushback.
Yeah. Good.
Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I like that. And, I talk about jobs to be done in my book as a kind of universal language that anybody can in the organization can find themselves in, right? You can do strategy or marketing or customer success. Even I talk to customer success team, but what I don't do is provide a good answer to Hector's question: is where should it be set? Where's the center of gravity there? Here's what I thought you were going to say, Steph. I thought you were going to say in research, right? Because it is so research, particularly the doing of jobs, because it is so research heavy, people like yourself or, people with backgrounds like me and Elaine, that I think it's easier to do that a little bit. That's at least what I found in terms of the doing of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Or doing it maybe to a level of rigor. Yeah. I think you can rely on people with research background to do it. When I've seen product managers doing it, I was like, I need to maybe coach a little bit on how to interview.
Right, exactly. Right.
In a few cases, but that's okay. That means they're into it. But one of the things I have noticed is when they start to do Jtbd, product folks and design folks appreciate research a lot more. They appreciate how hard it is when they have to do it.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
All right, Hector.
Thanks Hector.
Nice to see you, Hector. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Okay, yeah, no, anybody's welcome here. So we're going over to CJ over in Holland.
Yeah, hey, and a lot of the people on the call already responded, so we had a nice little chat about what other people do. So, but yeah, and also interested in your opinion, obviously, Steph.
Oh, I wish I had a time to scroll through to see what people say. How long does it take? Goodness me. It can vary. Like I've had such interviews that happened that someone said like 30 minutes. But sometimes even if it's 30 minutes and you stick with it, you can get so much more insight. Now, the question is whether that's going to be useful or not. We've had, I think I've had switches that took over an hour, particularly. So one, I guess, like, depending on your experience with Switch, what I do appreciate about this method is that it goes straight to the emotional. If you don't get emotional responses from participants, I want to say it's not that you're not doing it right. It's more that there's more deeper that you can go. But however, I want to draw a line that, speaking as a researcher, ethics for me is the most important. So you want to understand that point where the participant doesn't want to go, and you stop there. Because if you do go further, it becomes a point where it can be traumatic. It can, to the point that is no longer actually useful for your product design, but also a traumatic experience for the participant. So it takes a little practice to know where that moment is, where you sort of go into the darker side of the Switch interview, because it is such an emotional process. And why people make decisions sometimes. Like I'll give you a couple of examples. This was not a real research piece, but it was a sort of demonstration piece. I had two occasions where so someone said, "Oh, I ended up buying an innocent white pair of shoes I've been looking at for weeks because my husband went to hospital that day." And I've had someone said something like, "I ended up, settling on this chair in the end because I divorced." And so then you go, okay. I usually apologize at that point because they didn't have to tell me that. And also, so you have to be wary about where that limit is. And usually, I know over here we tend to be quite careful about participant conversations. So, for example, if I'm running a workshop with a whole team and I use somebody from the team to do a demo with me, I will actually ask them that they're comfortable, sharing in front of their colleagues or with no people in the room first, and that we don't cross that point. So it's a very long answer to that question, because you can always go deeper, you can always go longer, but whether it's useful or not is something that it has to be an agreement between you and the participant. Second part of the question: how much time do I spend looking at the data? So this is for me a research mathematics question. Usability test for me takes about roughly 1-to-1 in terms of the amount of time you spend asking questions, the amount of time you spend analyzing. Something like the Switch, I would give it as rich as almost ethnographic data. I want to say it'd be 1-to-3, ratio of 1-to-3. So imagine 1 day of interviews, give yourself 3 days of analysis thereabouts. But then again, I'm speaking as a researcher. I don't know if that has a bias to it.
I was going to say 1-to-4, but it depends on the data collection. So how do you collect the data? Do you record them and take notes and do a transcription? Do you prefer one or the other? Or do you have a different way to collect the data actually?
Oh, it depends on who I have available. It's so much resource driven. I was very old school. I was so used to being the under-resourced researcher, where I would be running 2 video cameras, running the interview, and then taking my own notes on the fly. So I try not to do that anymore. It's very hard for your brain. But I take good notes. So yeah, roughly, I would say 1-to-4 is a very good guidance because it's so rich. I do record, but I tend to take good notes that allow me to go straight to the video. And if I have my actually preferred method is to get the transcript rather than a video. I find it easier to scan than to listen in terms of timing.
I agree. I like full transcripts as well too, but I've been doing what I call paraphrasing, where I actually write in the first person what the person is saying and then go back and analyze your paraphrased notes too. That's another data collection. It shortens the cycle to like 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 instead of 1-to-4. Yeah.
And so do you do that? Do you do that on the fly, Jim?
I do the paraphrasing on the fly. So as you're talking, you might say a whole paragraph and I just write one sentence that captures the essence of that. Immediately after the interview, you have to go back and rewrite it before you forget, because sometimes it's gobbledygook what comes out of your fingers, or there's typos. And I make a nice story. But if you do like an hour interview, it's like 6 pages instead of 30 pages of text. So you get a lot less and it's a lot compressed. But you're going to miss things. too. There's going to be a little bit of detail that gets lost as well too, but it makes analysis a little bit quicker to do the paraphrased note taking.
I do something similar. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to the discussion. I also take notes when I'm doing it, and I will miss stuff, but in the end, it takes me less time because I have my very short notes and I can work with that also. And what we also do when I sometimes take students with me, and then they take notes, and when I realize there's some need, I ask them, do you want to minimize the time it takes to blah, 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 like the ODA stuff, like a hint to the one that takes note.
I see.
And this is like the indicator. Now you have to write down what I'm saying. And when they confirm, it's logged in already. So I have the need logged in, and that saves time in the end if you don't have 4 hours per interview to extract all stuff. Yeah. It's a pragmatic approach.
I do something very similar, but I tend to try and take note against the timeline. So my note taking is structured already. And so you roughly know when in the conversation and the timeline, which timeline. It makes it slightly easier to analyze later.
And I think that's one of the strengths of the switch, is that it does give you that pre-formatted structure that you can then work against and talk to and move forward and backwards, and not only in what you're saying, but in what you're writing as well too.
I think it's also really nice that you can kind of use mirroring techniques, because we share the screen. So we use Mural and share the screen when
you do
taking notes in based on this visual structure. So you kind of like, did you mean this actually?
Yeah. So the participant sees the screen, Anna? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
So they can say, no, that's not what I said. And they can correct you as they're going along.
Yes. We do the same with job mapped technique, but also with the switch interview. So did you mean this? And we indeed, like Steph, like you said, we do it in a step where it belongs. But it's so, I always used to take notes when I was taking interviews. So this is so nice to actually show what notes are you taking to, I mean, you are kind of doing analysis with
on the fly, right?
Yeah.
All right.
That's a really good idea. I really like it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to move on to the next question and see what Brent has to ask.
Oh, hey, it's good to be here. It's more of an observation, or I guess a wondering. We've been playing with switch interviews too, because clients are asking us for value prop support to help inform their sales approach. So we've been trying to integrate them as well in our work, and it seems like switch interviews fall more into the win-loss kind of orientation, in terms of understanding how they made decisions, how they bought, or why they didn't buy, versus jobs to be done. I guess when I read Bob Mess's books, I think you could do the whole thing without calling jobs to be done, or even using the language. Like, it doesn't seem like it really needs it. Like, he's kind of like integrated it somehow because he's fallen into it. But I don't know. It seems like it's confusing to me. I think jobs to be done, in my mind, feels a lot clearer if it's in the ODI, like innovation orientation of the job mapping. And that's kind of how I've organized my thinking around it anyways, and kind of where one fits and where the other one fits. And just some thoughts.
What do you think, Steph?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like that's I mean, it was called the switch interview in the first place, and then they renamed it to Jtbd. So I feel like it's and then I think at one point it's called Jtbd switch. I feel like it's I don't know. I haven't got a strong opinion on that, to be honest. It doesn't bother me that much, I suppose. I wouldn't say, though, that is just quite a win-loss. I think the strength in the switch interview is much more about uncovering the emotional and social influences, whereas your outcome-driven. So you have to think about where it comes from. Bob is a storyteller. If you've never met him, he's he thinks in stories, and the method itself, sort of like base comes straight from sort of market research, whereas something like outcome-driven innovation was come from manufacturing. So it was more important to look at the steps and how things happened. So understanding that these are just different aspects of how you can arrive at related jobs is probably the best and most constructive way that I would say to think about it, if that makes sense. Rather than, yeah, it's not a, for me, they just don't compare. They do really different things.
Right. Right. I agree with that. They seem like they're doing different jobs.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
It's so hard not to make puns in this conversation.
Right. Yeah. Jobs and switch. Thanks, Brent. I guess we had Hector already. Is that can I move on to Greg before I come back to you, Hector? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Just to hear another voice, another question.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, Greg, do you want to come on and let us know what's on your mind?
Well, it's a rather germane question. Just want a more expert or resource to learn about switch interviews.
Good question. Bob's new book isn't bad, but there was a really slim book called, I'm pretty sure it's called Jobs to Be Done Interview.
I think it's called the handbook. It's Jtbd handbook.
The handbook.
I think it's called the red one. Yeah.
The thin little red book. That's probably the best resource, I think, that just focuses on the interview.
That's what comes to my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if the podcasts are still live, because I think way back when, to go with the book, there were still several podcasts where you can hear it. I think it's called Jtbd Radio.
Mm-hmm.
Which if you want to listen to sort of how, Bob and Chris used to do their interviews, they can be quite helpful just to get the sense of it. But I want to preface something about that interview. I've always felt that they were almost too, they talk about it as interrogation, right? It's kind of like, it's like you're trying to find out, what's behind this crime. And to be honest, that really is very uncomfortable for a participant. When we're doing it for MailChimp, we was with this friendly brand with, a monkey mascot. So so you can't do that, scary interrogation type interview. So basically, I would suggest that once you look at the resource, try and adapt to your brain, your brand tone and voice, to make sure that at least you're trying to rephrase the questions in such a way that will get you the answers, but maybe a little bit less conflict inducing. How do I say it?
Good.
So yeah.
Good advice. Yeah, check out the Jobs to Be Done handbook by Bob Mesta and I guess Chris Speak. I don't know who the co-author there is. It's a thin red.
Yeah, I think
book.
it was Chris. Yeah.
Chris. Yeah. All right, we'll go back to you, Hector. What's on your mind?
Thank you. Well, I guess it's just enriching the last question. Well, I'll just read it. In your perspective, from both of you, Jim and Steph, who is the job performer and his or her job to be done to implement jobs to be done? I mean, what is the job to be done to decide I need jobs to be done?
What do you think, Steph?
I don't know if that's clear now.
I think I need a bit more explanation. Can you try that again? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question fully.
Sorry, that was a bad question. It's like, what do you look for when you decide you need to implement jobs to be done? What are you looking for?
I think that there's a little bit, and where I grew up, we use the term eating your own dog food. Like, do you use jobs to be done in any way when you're planning to do a larger jobs to be done project? Does that kind of get to what you were asking, Hector?
Yes.
I don't, mostly because I never have the time, to be honest. I don't because they're, so for me, I mean, maybe this is something that research has always been sort of struggling with to some degree. Like first and foremost, sometimes in some organizations, you're trying to start research in the first place. Then usually what we have found is let the results speak for itself. Like I would just, because if I come and say to someone, I'm going to use this framework that you've never heard of and it's got 4 letters, it's just, you know, you're going to sort of like get everyone's hackles up and they might find it too risky. So what I would tend to do is just do it and then show the results and build that way. So yeah, sorry, my answer I guess is no. This is not time for that.
I don't do real consulting, but I do coaching, and I speak with a lot of people around the world about jobs to be done. And one of the first questions I ask is, or I try to, first of all, I try to listen to where they are and what their problem is they're trying to solve, right? And sometimes I'll hear things like, we're trying to improve our product, or, you know, something obvious like that. Well, actually, jobs to be done is not the right framework for you. Just go out and do some usability tests and things like that. So I will try, and I'll say again, because I'm not selling jobs to be done as consulting, and I'll say jobs to be done is not the right framework for you, or question people for that, right? So for me, you know, jobs to be done has 2 super high level jobs. One is innovation, you know, as Brent was talking about, right? That you're trying to find the unmet need that the market may eventually find before the market finds that unmet need, so that you can innovate and accelerate adoption. For me, jobs to be done is about accelerate. You're trying to predict adoption. Why are people going to pull your solution in towards themselves or not? The other big category is demand generation, and I think this is where some of the schools of thought come to diverge. And, you know, to Brent's question too, is like, is demand generation, do we need jobs to be done label on top of that? I think, you know, interesting enough, you know, Strategy and ODI, they look at demand generation as well too. But for me, those are two different jobs. Are you trying to innovate, or are you trying to generate demand?
Yeah.
So I'll look at it through that lens. Yeah.
Got it. That's amazing.
And very often, if the answer is generate demand, it might not be jobs to be done is what they need, actually.
Yeah.
No.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. How are we doing on time here? I'm not like just. Let's get to Anna's question.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
And there are also some really good comments in the chat if you want to circle back and have like Wolfram or Brent mention anything, that because they also had responses to the last question.
Okay. What's on your mind, Anna?
Hi. Well, I obviously really love using ODI framework, and we work a lot with the job maps. We do also switch interviews in different contexts, but I also, stumble upon Teresa Torres' opportunity tree and her continuous discovery habits. If you're familiar with it, Steph and Jim.
I don't know the opportunity tree. Do you know
it's from Continuous Discovery Habits from Teresa Torres.
I gotta read that.
I know of the book, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, no, actually, like Jim, like in your playbook, you combine many methods. Teresa also actually kind of goes, she mentions also strategizer at certain points. So she kind of goes through different methods. But her point, the things that I really like, the opportunity tree, it's basically the desire, it's a tree. So obviously on the top level is the desired outcomes for the business. Then you have product desired outcomes, so product metrics. And then under you hang the opportunities, which are basically same as need statement from ODI or from strategizer, but from ODI you have it much more better structured, and then you generate solution based on the most promising opportunities.
Okay.
So it's a very nice kind of connecting of what the business wants and what the customer wants in one
interesting.
So
all right, in one thing.
Very interesting. No, I mean, I really loved it, and I kind of really tried last few months to apply it. But yeah, I do job map interviews, enriching job map.
I see.
Then you have this ODI based quality research with all the need statement. Well, I do struggle because if you follow really what Tony Alvik says, then of course you can't miss the context. It should be in the context of the job map. You can't just take need statement out of the context. Okay, but then you create such a complex structure, let's say, that nobody will understand what you're looking at. So now I took out
trying to combine them.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's really promising, but doesn't really fit on each other. So I was wondering if anyone here or
I need to look at the opportunity tree, but my first instinct is they don't go together, because the model that you described for the opportunity tree is hierarchical and a job map is chronological, the basic structure of how the information is organized, and it feels like they actually don't fit together. Maybe they can. I have to think about that. Does anybody, I'll just throw a jump ball up, Elaine, and see if anybody can grab it. A little basketball reference there. Anybody on the call know about the opportunity tree model and how they've fit in? Hector's there.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, you have the book.
Manuela, do you know the opportunity?
I have an opinion, but I don't think it's a solution. My opinion is that actually the opportunities, the jobs to be done are the opportunities. And from there on, you design solutions.
I think it's a level down. I think that need statements are the opportunities, because need the same as the pain, opportunity, whatever you want to create solutions for. So it does match. And I think Teresa mentions that it's the same thing as well. Just I struggle with what to do with, and she says also it can be chronological, but it doesn't, because it's a tree. So you have a parent and you have a branches, and then you're losing. So I was wondering if anyone kind of.
What the opportunity tree says is that you shouldn't only build one solution, because if you don't know the jobs. And the second thing, the opportunity tree is saying it's always like start with the opportunities and don't jump over that. So I think it's different stages of the product discovery phase and the solution phase.
But you do product discovery to come up with a solution at the end. So we do always discovery, and then there is a step of coming up solution. So you
need to align those things, right? Yeah,
you shouldn't miss them, but once you have them, it's very nice to combine. So I'm basically trying to.
You know what I'm going to do, Anne? I'm going to throw this back out as a way to end our session here and put that as a challenge to the group. So everybody has a homework assignment. Go read Teresa Torres and think about the opportunity tree and the job map and how those things fit together. And maybe when we get back together, we can actually answer together. We can answer Anna's question on the next Untangled. So you got homework, everybody. You'll be graded. No, you won't be graded.
I think that's very similar to. I think that's very similar to something I ran into a lot too. That a lot of qualitative research identifies pain points or challenges, that the customer is feeling, and it's like, okay, that's good signal. There's something going on there, but can we get that into what is the outcome? What are they trying to achieve? Turn it into a job
and align those things.
Then that way we have commonality in what we're testing in the jobs, to prioritize stuff. It's like that's just that it's a pain point. It doesn't. I think
part of this is the point of this forum that we've created and why we call it Jobs to be Done Untangled. I mean, it might be the opposite of untangling. We're actually trying to merge and mash up, but for me, that's part of untangling is, taking these things that exist, because we don't want to exclude other methodologies, design thinking, lean, Teresa Torres. We don't want to exclude those things. But I think we as a field, as a group of interest here, we still need to work on those things. And that's the ongoing thought process and why we get together once a month. So I think we're at the end of time here, and we'll have to end it there, Elaine. Any other final words that you wanted to throw in before we close the session?
No, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to Steph. This was amazing. Great conversation. And I posted the link for our April event in the chat. So you'll have that there, and we'll send out a link to some of the resources that were discussed later on.
So, hey, thanks for coming, everybody. And we'll see you again. Some of you maybe next week because we're doing the course, but otherwise we'll see you at the end of April.